Today we're going to replace these steps with these new steps. This summer we put in this nice new gazebo over our hot tub, and now we want to improve on the steps. There's nothing really wrong with these steps. We just want something wider. And we want to add side access, so we want a low step on the side as well. The old steps measure 16 and 8 inches high, and we're pretty much going to stick with those heights. Well, like I often do, I started in SketchUp working out the design. I found a model online of a hot tub that was the same size as ours and brought that in. And then I worked and worked and worked until I came up with the design for steps that I liked. The top step is almost a foot wider than the current one at 33 inches. There's a wraparound lower step, so we have side access on both sides. And I added dimensions and measurements all over the model because you can't have too many. Once I have everything that I think I need, I like to take all the parts and lay them out on top of virtual pieces of wood. This helps me put together a shopping list to take to the lumberyard and to later use as a cutting guide. So this is what I picked up at the lumberyard. This is all the wood that I need to build those steps. This is all pressure treated lumber. I've got 3 2x8s, 2 2x4s for the support structure. And then for the treads, I've got these 5/4 inch deck boards, which are 5.5 inches wide. I was hoping this was going to be an inexpensive project, but you know, these 9 boards with some deck screws added up to 130 bucks. And I'm going to build it all down here in my shop because that's where all my tools are. We'll just carry it outside later. My miter saw is not big enough to cut through a 2x8. I don't have a slider, so I'm going to do almost all of my cuts either with a table saw or with a handheld circular saw. For the lower part of the structure, the lower set of steps, I need to rip the 2x8s down to 6.5 inches in order to come to the finished step height of 8 inches. And so I'm going to do that on the table saw. As I was marking up my pieces, I realized I had some extra pieces of 2x8 that I don't really need. So I'm going to rip them in half, and that will use that as some of the internal structure and save some of the 2x4. 2x8s are more expensive than 2x4, I realize that, but I just don't really need this stuff otherwise. Butt joints are perfectly serviceable and arguably easier, but I thought I'd do miters just for looks, and so I got my table saw set up to take a 45, and we got a lot of precise cutting ahead of us. The miters turned out pretty nice. In the back, I'm just doing butt joints because that's in the back, and got things clamped up now for screwing it together. The positioning of the middle cross piece doesn't really matter, but these two need to be exactly 10.5 inches in from the end in order for the outer steps to work out correctly. The step boards are also going to be coming at a 45, which means I need to have a support right here at the 45, which means this board needs to go right into the corner. So I need a 45 right on the edge, and I'll cut that here on the miter saw. And then with the point cut, I'm just lining it up so it's nice and tight in the corner. I'm going to take a sharp pencil, and I'm just going to run it along here. And I will cut along that mark. And then you take it and fit it into place. And I'm using a clamp here to make a spare set of hands. And the end result is a pretty perfect 45 right in the corner, which is what we need. And that completes the bottom structure. So now I need to do the same thing except smaller with the top structure. The one thing to keep in mind is that the top step needs to exactly line up with these two supports. So it doesn't matter what's in the plans. I'm going to measure this now, and if it's off by an 1/8 or a 1/16, then I'll adjust my cuts. As on the lower structure, the middle support, the positioning is not critical, whereas the two outer ones, it's a little bit more finicky because you want to make sure you got proper support for the tread boards that you're putting in. There's one more step before we can get to putting the treads on it. Let me bring you in close for that. So this board is the same thickness of one of the treads, so that's going to go here on the bottom, and this will represent one of the treads on top. But that only gives us a 7¼ inch step, and we're aiming for an 8-inch step. So I need to make some 3/4 inch spacers that will support this top structure. This lower piece is also only 7½ inches right now, but I'd planned right from the beginning to add some feet in the corners because I kind of want to keep this off the ground just for a little bit of air, and just because I don't think the patio is perfectly flat. I ripped these spacers out a bit of pressure treated 2x4, and the nice thing about this thickness is that it's skinny enough that the tread will completely hide it from view, so you'll never see it. And the first one promptly split, so I had to make another one, and this time I pre-drilled before putting in those deck screws. Drilling close to the end in a thin piece is just asking for it, I know, so I should have known better. I attached the top to the bottom just with some 2x4 scraps on from the inside, holding it together. And then I went ahead and prepared and attached the feet that I was putting under the whole thing, remembering to pre-drill first. You may be looking at this feet thing with a bit of suspicion, and I'll be the first to admit that it's an experiment. Ask me in a year or two if I'm happy with this. I'll make sure I put notes down below or in a pinned comment or something if this turns out to be a bad idea. But for us, we have patio stones, not a poured concrete pad in front of our hot tub, and it's not perfectly level. So by adding some feet, I add a little bit of space, so hopefully it will sit flat, but also just it'll keep things off the ground a bit, which I hope will help with moisture. An experiment. Again, ask me in a year or two. I'll make sure I put a note down below. So I was about to start cutting out the treads when I discovered that my miter saw is also too small to cut the 45 part of these 5½ inch treads. Again, my miter saw doesn't slide. So I guess I'll be cutting those on the table saw. That's what works best for me. I mean, you can also freehand it on with a circular saw or something else like that. Luckily, it's big enough for straight cuts. I'm trying for a 1/2 inch overhang all around, so I've cut some 1/2 inch spacer blocks, and I'm using that to mark where I need to cut the boards to get the overhang that I want. And I'm hitting the edges with some 80 grit sandpaper to take off any roughness. I started with the inner tread so I can push it right up against the upper step. Now I take the outer one, and I can just take my measurements off of the piece itself. Here at the ends, you can see how the angled piece is providing support, but I'm still pre-drilling because it's quite close to the edge. I kind of wish I had skinnier screws, or maybe even put a second support along here, but it's been okay. But I'm putting the screws in very gently. I'm not just hitting them home with the driver. So rather than my big 18-volt impact, I'm using a little 12-volt driver. It's not even an impact for putting in the deck screws. So I feel like I have a lot more control and less chance of it just sort of punching a hole right through or splitting. Now for the top step, I've got nothing to line it up against, so I'm kind of making this up as I go, but I think the thing to do is I'm going to line it up with that miter there, and I'm going to use my spacers here to give me that 1/2 inch off that I'm looking for. Well, that should be, yeah. And let me put a clamp in here. And then over at this end, also put a clamp at this end. So over here, I left it a little bit long, and I've got the front lined up with that 1/2 inch spacer. Now let me put that on the side, and then we'll bring this. That should be the point that I want to aim for. So I'll probably cut it a bit long to begin with and then finesse it. And a bit more fiddling, and I did have to cut this one twice, but it's pretty lined up. So I'm going to screw this one into place, and then we will take the other measurements off of this piece. The 2x4 gives lots more room for support, so I'm not really as worried about splitting, so I can stay just a little bit farther back. With the front piece fastened in place, I can then cut these, and you have something fixed to push up against and measure off and all of that. And for the last couple of pieces, I just cut them to fit. I thought about putting the big piece in front, but I think it looks better if I put the big piece on the outside, and now we're sort of picture framing this. So, but I'm gonna run this over the router to round it over more to match these boards before I put it together. And then the battery died on the camera, but you know, just a little round over. And with that, it's ready to be brought outside. I had my son give me a hand. There's no way I'm picking this up by myself, but wow, I think it looks a whole lot better than the old one. Let me click back to a photo of what the original one looks like. We've added the side access that we wanted. We got a larger top step, and on the whole, I just think it looks a whole lot better. If you're curious, this is what I've got left at the end after building those steps. The 2x8s are basically entirely used up. I have almost 8 feet of one of those deck boards left, but it's all in different pieces, and some of the deck boards had little defects in them, so I was kind of glad that I had bought 4 and not just 3. I have a little bit of 2x4, but most interesting is one of the 8-foot 2x4s I didn't use at all because of the way I ripped up the 2x8 to make sections. So I'm gonna try returning that, so my price will actually come down a little bit. I used almost an entire box of 3-inch deck screws. This was a box of 94 approximately, so 100. I already had some 1.5-inch screws. That's what I used for attaching the deck board, so I don't actually know how much more that would have cost, but remember, I spent about $130 total, less whatever I can get back for that one 8-foot 2x4. And that's about it for this one. Thanks for stopping by. In case anybody's interested, I think I will package up my plans and put them on my website, so you can find links to that down below, and we'll see you on the next one.